go to the, what I'd like you to do with the standards that we had, okay? So if you could go to advisory opinion number 9.
Yep.
Can you find that one? There are some standards that are out there on contaminated property, and they are not always going to be universally applicable, but there are a variety of standards that are emerging from your profession and also from government agencies that are involved in things that you do that are starting to develop as a framework of criteria that you can call upon when you're giving it. And one of them was advisory opinion number 9, which is the advisory opinion
by the Appraisal Standards Board.
Yeah, and this has actually been touted about quite a lot. This has been out there, and there have been some lectures actually about that. So I mean, if you think this one's brutal, anyway, this is called advisory opinion number 9: responsibility of appraisers concerning toxic and hazardous substance contamination. It's readily available on the internet. It's readily available on the internet.
We haven't used that quote.
This is not a use PAP, though.
No, but the advisory opinions are...
Okay, that's right.
Oh.
That's right. That's good. And so I think that this provides some interesting information that you should be aware of when you're providing testimony and an opinion as to contaminated property. And you should know that if you don't take some of these kinds of things into account, will be possible fertile ground for cross-examination. So you want to make sure that you at least consult these things, and if you don't use these kinds of things, explain why you didn't. Honesty and professional competency are common threads. An appraiser should not be presumed to have knowledge, experience as a specialist, and he may reasonably or she may reasonably rely on findings and opinions of others. There was, at one time, a practice by appraisers to say, no, not applicable, not known, you know, that kind of thing. When it comes to contamination, that's becoming less acceptable, you know, and there's becoming, I think, an emerging requirement to make some inquiry. And while you aren't going to be me, which is probably a good thing, and while you're not going to be an environmental expert, there is, because this is becoming more and more of a material factor concerning the value of property, I think there's becoming an emerging responsibility on the part of appraisers to at least make inquiry and try to understand these things, and then footnote at least accordingly, so that you can indicate that it's been taken into account, or that it isn't, but that further inquiry might be appropriate. So advisory opinion number 9 is something you should definitely look at and become familiar with. The other one is Freddie Mac single family requirements, section 44.15 D2. An appraiser must consider known contaminated site or hazardous substances that affect properties or neighborhoods. Now look at that. It says or neighborhoods. Or neighborhoods. Think about that. That's really, really interesting, you know, because there are a lot of issues, a lot of instances here in New Jersey where, you know, a particular piece of property may or may not be contaminated, and they probably don't know, but there's a regional problem. So, and very often it's groundwater. Very often there's a plume of groundwater that's contaminated. Think about this. In many parts of Union County, we have a contaminant, so that's middle part of Jersey for anyone that's not from here. We have a regional contamination with what's called TCE, which is a degreaser that was used. There's a regional TCE problem in much of Union County. Much of Union County doesn't rely on individual wells for water sources. Most people have public water. So it's not that they're going to get, you know, people are going to get cancer from drinking it. But the question is, and it's a reasonable question, does a regional TCE problem in the water have an impact on groundwater? Now, 10 years ago, most of you would have said no, because nobody's drinking it and nobody's going to be in contact with it, and it's everywhere, so who cares? But 10 years ago, we started to understand that this TCE vaporizes, and it goes through the foundations of the buildings, and it becomes what's called vapor intrusion. And at certain levels, it gives people cancer. So what 10 years ago, no one would have thought was a problem, and everyone would have uniformly agreed has no value on residential property, because it's not like there's a disclosure problem because kind of everybody has it. Now it's different, I think. As a lawyer, I think it's different. I'm not an appraiser. But I think it's different because I think you at least need to understand whether there's a propensity for vapor intrusion. Vapor intrusion is becoming a very big deal at the regulatory level, and about 5 years ago, the state DEP here in New Jersey started requiring it in a lot of cases. Yes, sir?
Where do they suspect the source came from for that in Union County?
All over the place. It was ubiquitous. TCE is a solvent that's used in industries all across the board, and because of history of various industry uses over there, they have a problem. Now, when I was Deputy Attorney General, they had that problem, and they still have the problem. So why I'm saying, so that was I was a DAG in the 80s. The thing is this, that these chlorinated hydrocarbons, TC and PC, PC is the first cousin of TC, a little better looking, but the first cousin. PC comes from dry cleaners. Dry cleaners all use, generally all use it. Wherever you have dry cleaners, there's a reasonable chance you're going to have PC, especially if they're old. So anyway, that's basically our presentation. I want to thank you very, 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 very much for spending time with us. And